Record. There you
Okay,
go.
we're good. I'll begin. Alan Myers here. This is For the Republic. I'm so happy to have returning guest Douglas V Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, and Brady, the War Hamster. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us, Alan. I'm excited because this is the debut of my new studio setup. I've got my new camera.
So everything's working.
Oh yeah, I had 2 days to figure it out. I may be slow, but I'm not that slow.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, the big wackadoodle that we're going to get to, of course, is Silicon Valley Bank. And I think, Brady, you might have something else. I'm going to start off with some light stuff.
I've got a wackadoodle too. If you when you get the chance.
Okay. This one is just because it's this dumb. This is out of Canada. Oh, what a surprise! A Catholic school student was arrested and charged in connection with him saying that men and women are different. The student is Josh Alexander, and he says that he was at a Canadian Catholic high school in Ontario, and then he complained or spoke his mind about, males being in female restrooms. And he indicated that female students complained to him that they were concerned because males were using their washroom. This topic turned up into a debate at the school. He stated his opinion, and apparently at a Catholic school, he used scripture to back up his position.
How dare he?
Of course. He got removed from the building for the remainder of the year. When he came back to attend class, he was arrested. Really? At that kind of high school? Doug, any thoughts?
You said really, as I was putting olives in my mouth, I thought you were commenting on my olives.
No. The olives are no surprise.
That used to be a wackadoodle news item. Now it's a normal news item.
No, it's still whack.
Yeah, it's still wacky, but wackadoodle news to me is stuff that you just don't see every day. We're seeing this stuff every day now. This has become a norm. And it's funny because I've got so many articles I want to write about this issue. I just haven't had the chance and I've got a list of links that are probably 30 or 40 links long. Trans-identified biological male daycare worker charged with sexual abuse of infant in Kentucky. 13 mayors arrested for child pornography. School board member says it's not safe to hire Christian teachers because of their sexual morality. I know from experience. No, wait, that's not one. California teacher fired for refusing to lie to parents about student gender identity. Let's see here. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, I literally go through the whole list and would take half the show. So I won't.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
We don't get my point. I always thought that wackadoodle news was supposed to be something that's wacky. You don't see it very often. It is wacky. So my thought about this is this. It's funny that kid would pull out the Bible, and when you look at biblical scripture, while sin is sin, there is special attention given to sexual sin. And sexual sin, if you read the Bible, is basically an abomination. That word is used a handful of times. And why it says that is because sexual sin does something that other sins don't do. It justifies itself. If someone's a kleptomaniac and they claim to have been born that way, they then don't claim that stealing stuff is suddenly okay because they're born that way. Is my point. But sexual sin tries to justify itself. And that's a part of what makes it dangerous. The other thing that makes it dangerous is because it tries to justify itself, it destroys societies. It destroys cultures, when Rome was at its absolute height of rot from within, the normalization of homosexuality, the normalization of orgies in the streets and other sexual sins, and I'm guessing men being men trying to be girls and girls trying to be boys too, although I have not read that specifically. I'm going to guess that was a part of it. No doubt in my mind.
Well, they had eunuchs.
Now
they had eunuchs.
Oh, this is true. But my point is this. Now, in the end, it comes down to liberty. You want to do something in your personal life? I'm fine with it. That's between you and God. My problem is when it becomes something that you're using law to force me to accept and champion and celebrate. That's when it becomes a real problem on culture too. If you want to have your own community and do what you do, knock yourself out. The consequences are there, and that's between you and God. But don't drag the rest of society down with you by trying to force us now to normalize this stuff by arresting a child who says, wait a second, boys are boys and girls are girls. Last thing, and then I'm going to hand this over to Brady. And I said this yesterday on Constitution Radio, as a matter of fact, on a similar subject. That boy who claims to be a girl and that girl claims to be a boy, when they die, and 100 years from now, an archaeologist finds those bones and they test them, guess what they're going to say? That person was a biological male or female. May have been wearing a dress, but it's a male. That's what its DNA says. That's what the chromosomes say. All right, Brady, all yours.
Oh, thank you, Doug.
Well, I knew he was next.
I've been gone too long. Yes, Brady, your thoughts.
Well, Alan, your story was out of Canada, if I think I heard that correctly, which means we should not be the least bit surprised. The encroachments on what we consider to be, liberties and truth coming out of the Great White North, America's hat, over the last couple of years are getting very interesting. So, did I hear that right? It was Canada.
Canada.
Yes. Do you guys ever listen to Jesse Kelly?
No.
He's entertaining. He's certainly outspoken and has his own opinion, and he loves to create controversy. But he talked about an interview where Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, went on CNN, Anderson Cooper. Why would he do that? You're going to get ambushed. But Youngkin apparently handled it pretty well. Jesse Kelly was poking a few holes, but what they did is they brought on a trans person to, your policies are killing me. You're causing violence against me, what have you. And Youngkin came up with the answer of, this is why I've been saying we need more bathrooms in schools, so that people that don't identify as male or female can have the place where they can use the restroom or what have you by themselves. Well, Jesse Kelly, who I think correctly points out, says, and he's a fan of Youngkin. Apparently, Jesse Kelly's got some people close to Youngkin, and he thinks Youngkin's a lot closer to the MAGA position than most people portray. Okay. And that's based on people that know him. And Jesse Kelly's pretty well sourced, so I'm going to go with that. But he makes the point that you give these people an inch and they're going to take a mile. Where do we just draw the line and say, no, we live in reality. Men are men, women are women. That's it. Period. Quit trying to encroach upon these lines, because we've seen what's happened. First of it was, we just want to be able to get married, and then it got to where it is today, where it's being taught in schools, and that's basically caused me to spend the last 2 weekends out there signing petitions for a high school school board position to make sure that stuff stays out of a local school. And it's enough's enough. Draw the line.
Yeah, that's right. So are you saying the bathroom door should be labeled M, W, and question mark?
Well, I like the little figures because that way there's no confusions for those of us who are illiterate. But it's very easy to see a difference between a dress and a guy and a dude. So yeah, that's
usually, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
With nuts, without nuts, and a shake.
Thank you for that. All right, we're moving on. For anybody out there who's old enough to care, according to this article, the government may stop issuing Social Security payments after the debt limit is hit. And that's because, according to this article, a little-known provision of a 1996 law could be interpreted to allow the funds in Social Security to not only pay for Social Security, but to be used to pay government bills. I just saw this. I picked up on it. I don't know if you'd heard anything about it. Right now, the last I heard, Social Security will run out of its surplus in 2033, give or take, 10 years from now, which means with no changes to the system, benefits would get cut maybe 20%. Brady, had you heard anything about this, or got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, your numbers match my understanding as well. It's 2033 or 34. And I find it really interesting because this is a political hot potato right now. And the Democratic position is that Republicans are trying to steal your Social Security, whereas the Republican position is, no, your Social Security is going to be gone if we don't do anything. We're trying to save it. It is such a political hot potato, and the media, of course, is been grossly irresponsible and reporting the actual truth. But at the end of the day, Social Security was, back then you worked till you were 65 and died by age 70. It was set up as a Ponzi. It always has been. But people put their, good, hardworking people put their money in, and they need to get a return, no matter how badly that return has been watered down by cost of living adjustments, et cetera, and changing the way we measure inflation. At the end of the day, the United States of America, if it's going to continue to be an ongoing concern, has to honor these obligations to the people who worked for 40 or 50 years. The solution I've always thought is you got to start to phase it out, which means the younger generations, including my own, people under the age of 60, need to continue to pay in while we privatize our own retirement. And it's going to take 20 or 30 years to pay off the people that already existed. But at the end of the day, it keeps the government solvent, because it is that money is gone. You cannot mathematically make it work at this point.
Thank you, Brady. Just a few thoughts, and then we'll get to Doug. And that is, and I've mentioned this before, PhD Pacan economist Lawrence Kontlakoff back in 2012 apparently did a present value calculation of the amount owed by Social Security as of 2012. The amount of unfunded liabilities, that is, the liabilities are coming that they don't have the funds for, over 200 trillion. This is not a system that, well, first of all, it was supposed to be, or initially was voluntary, but now it's no longer voluntary. It's a tax on your gross wages, and you don't have an option. Or it's a tax on your self-employment income. This is supposed to be old age insurance, but Social Security and the federal government, they keep changing the rules of the game whenever they want to. Well, that doesn't sound like an insurance policy. That just sounds like another tax. And how many people, maybe, going back a ways, they never would have purchased a home mortgage because all the money that went into Social Security would have been in their own account, and they maybe not have needed to get a mortgage. They may have been able to just cash out, or maybe they wouldn't have needed as big a one, which means all that interest that they had to pay for wouldn't have had to be spent. This has not been a good thing or it is not a good thing for the people coming, because it's going to run out of money if nothing changes. Doug, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, we know that anything that the federal government runs or operates or does is usually done in an idiotic manner. That said, there's no constitutional authority for Social Security. It's actually unconstitutional. However, as I've said all my life, you don't pull the rug out from people who put money into something and then they expect to have something there. And they plan their life based on the idea that they're going to get something. Now, I need to have this much out of my 401k and this much out of this pension because I know I'm going to get this much out of my Social Security. So, and now I've always been a fan of slowly and gradually privatizing it. So I agree with Brady on that. But here's what's interesting to me. First of all, the debt limit is an illusion. There is no limit. There never was a limit, and there never will be a limit. They will borrow until they collapse the whole system, which some people think is happening right now. We'll get to that later, I'm sure. Secondly, back in the 70s and 80s, when I was a young man, I was told by all the adults, there will be no Social Security when you are ready to draw from it. It will be bankrupt. Well, it became bankrupt long ago, but they kept it on a feeding tube and other things to keep it alive. And they keep telling us, oh, well, it's not going to be there for this, that. It's not there already. It's already gone. It stopped existing long ago. Now all it is a political tool. They're trying to get rid of it. We're trying to fix it. It's gone. What is happening now is they're taking money out of money they're borrowing to pay the people who are expecting something. And they're trying to figure out, because all they care about is power and how much money they got in their coffers. Almost said coffins. Their
Yes,
coffers.
you did. Yes, you did.
That they don't want to pay out. But it's already dead. It's already gone. And thank you for the cockroaches.
And I'll take the other side for a moment.
Yeah.
No, it's still not dead. I wouldn't call it dead, because I keep getting my monthly payment. So I'm going to say it ain't dead.
No. See, and that's where you're wrong, because see, dead men can send checks just like dead men can vote.
Alan, let me ask you a question about that payment you're receiving.
Yes.
Do you pay taxes on that? And didn't you already pay taxes on the money that went in?
Okay, we'll go through the steps. Thank you for that. You're a W-2. We'll just deal with that world. And you get your net payroll check, and they give you a little stub, and it says this was the gross, and this is all the different amounts and for what that was taken out, quote unquote, withheld. And one of them, of course, is Social Security and Medicare. Well, when federal income tax is withheld, it would be going to the federal government, and depending on what happens for your taxable year, you might get a refund or you might owe more. The Social Security is in essence a tax in that it's taken from your gross, but allegedly it's going to eventually be returned to you when you're too old to work and you're too stupid to save anyway, so we're going to save for you. No option. Initially it was an option, now it's no option. So give me your question again, please, Brady.
Well, they're talking now about, there is conversation about making Social Security payments tax-free.
No, well, they're already taxable right now, depending on what other source of money you have coming in. If you were living only on Social Security, chances are little or none would be taxable. However, if you're making $20,000, $30,000 a year, 70, 80%, the top is 80 or 85, I'm blanking. But I have one client, doesn't make a lot of money, doesn't get a lot of Social Security. 70% of the Social Security received is considered taxable income. So this is in essence a tax on funds that had your gross had already been taxed by taking this out. You're supposed to get it back, but when you get it back, it gets taxed again.
Double taxation.
Yeah. That's exactly the point of my question.
Yeah.
The Financial Planning Association, which is a pretty reputable organization that knows what they're talking about, has been recommending for more than a decade that people age 55 and under should not assume they're going to get a single dime of Social Security. They've since modified to say, assume you'll get a much more watered down amount of Social Security, but don't plan on any. So those of you under 55, the math does not work out for us.
We'll see. We'll see. But anyway, I just wanted to touch base on that. So now this came up in the chats between us all. So we'll talk about this one, and I figure we're going to spend some time. And in case you haven't heard, there's a bank in Silicon Valley, Northern California, called the Silicon Valley Bank. It was one of the 16th largest bank in the country. basically dealt with startups, not just in Silicon Valley, but elsewhere. Yeah, it's the 16th largest bank in the country. Well, on Friday, FDIC shut it down. And one of the reasons, or a lot of things were going on, but it started to really hemorrhage funds. People were coming in to take their money out. And to keep up with this, they had to sell part of their portfolio, their assets that were in treasuries. Well, because the interest rates on treasuries keep going up, their older treasuries had less value, which meant they had to sell them at a shortfall. And by Thursday, their stock had dropped in value by 60%. Now, Brady, had you heard anything about this?
Oh, I have heard everything about this, Alan. This is in my wheelhouse. This is my investment firms, our clientele are all venture capital types who bank with Silicon Valley Bank. So I'll be able to share a little bit of inside information that has not been reported once you're ready for me to do so.
Okay. Apparently, the last couple of things, and then we'll get to Doug, and then we'll get to Brady to fill in the blanks. Silicon Valley's failure happened incredibly quickly. They got shut down very early. Usually they wait till the end of the business day. That's the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corp. They wait to the end of the day to shut them down. This one, nope. They went in, shut it down. And they had to because they still have not found a buyer for the bank's assets. Now, what's interesting in one part I read, they were talking about the bank's total assets at around $209 billion at the time of failure. And then they talk about that the FDIC would be able to insure deposits up to $250,000. Well, okay, telling me about the total assets and then talking about the deposits doesn't match up for me. Deposits on a bank's balance sheet are liabilities. And what I want to know is, okay, you just told me the asset amount. What's the total liability count? Just tell it, it's not like, oh, well, you get 209 billion, we're going to sell everything. And no, some of that may have already been claimed by other liabilities. One person who wrote was talking about who had friends in the area banking with Silicon Valley, and they couldn't make payroll, so they had to shut it down. The other thing that I've seen in the news is that during last week, Silicon Valley Bank gave all of its employees their annual bonus from 2022. And it just so happened to happen, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday. Coincidence? Good fortune? Don't know.
Yeah, there was also a bit of top executive stock sales over the last 3 weeks. I have not been able to look to see if that's part of their regular 10b5-1 insider stock selling program or not, but it definitely did happen.
To give you an idea about the bonuses, they ranged between $12,000 all the way up to $140,000 for managing directors. That seems like a lot. That seems like a lot of money for a bonus. And apparently the bank has over 8,500 employees. And SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, it's not only connected throughout the US, it's connected in Europe and China. Doug, any thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, you got to remember, audience, when it comes to this topic, I am the layman of the three. We get into the Constitution, my wheelhouse. This, not so much. And so I will be, and I know this is shocking, short. Now, that said, also the reason why I keep muting myself for Alan's, my neighbor has decided that this is the time he wants to play drums. So I'm trying to keep the drums out, unless of course we get real serious. We may need the drums. Don't. But anyway, now I am under the understanding, and so this is kind of a question and a statement at the same time, that banks fail when liabilities exceed assets. Am I correct, Alan?
If liabilities exceed assets, it's considered insolvent. Yes.
Okay. So if they are collapsed or collapsing, and how is it they were able to unload assets to cover liabilities if the liabilities are nearly at that level of assets or exceeding? Then again, maybe they're only just catching part of it to stay afloat. I don't know. So that's my first question for either one of you gentlemen, and then I would like to continue with something else I want to say.
I
Well,
can address that if you don't mind, and Alan can expand on it. There's what you call capital maintenance levels, where you have to have a certain amount of tangible capital assets, and that number with most banks, you need to stay above 5% to be considered in good standing. Alan can probably weigh in on that with a little more detail, so I will pass the ball to him.
no, that's fine. The thing is that if you're looking at how much available liquid assets they had to, and what kind of market they had to sell them, as opposed to just having paper and coin in the vault and the teller drawers, chances are what they did, okay, if you're a Silicon Valley Bank employee, you have a Silicon Valley Bank account. And the way Silicon Valley Bank, pay you guys your bonus, it's pretty darn simple. I go over into my computer, get the keyboard out, make one journal entry, hit enter, you just got paid. The credit side of the entry is to your checking account at my bank. And when the balances go up in your checking account, you have more money. My offsetting and equal debit entry is to wage expense. Hit enter. That's how I got you paid.
Yeah,
I didn't put cash on your desk.
and on the accounting side, and that's one of the reasons I was really excited to talk about this tonight, because I do want to hear Alan's opinion on this, is when a bank holds assets, like a treasury bonds, they have two choices. They can basically allow them to be counted at market value, or they can say that they're going to hold it to maturity, in which case it's assumed that it's going to mature at 100%. The problem with what Silicon Valley Bank did, which is just unfathomable, is they bought a whole bunch of treasuries and they put it on their balance sheet as hold to maturity, and then did absolutely nothing to hedge their interest rate risk. And I will, in a couple of minutes here, I'll talk a little bit about why interest rate swaps are a big issue. But the accounting side of that, the ability to reclassify your assets as at market value or hold to maturity, is the main reason the banks started to get into trouble, because they bought a bunch of treasuries on a ridiculous assumption that interest rates wouldn't go up. 2 years ago, interest rates were at zero. It had only one direction to go, and they did not hedge. And I want to hear Alan weigh in on how quickly that deteriorated the balance sheet, because it did happen quickly.
It did happen. Well, it did and it didn't. This has been creeping as the Fed increases, their interest rate, and which means the Treasury interest rate has gone up. So now you have a choice between getting a current investment in a Treasury and just say, okay, it's 6% interest, versus, well, you want to sell me a Treasury that's only going to turn out 2% interest? Well, I ain't paying face value, because it's not going to produce what I can get. And the demand for cash, or the ability to produce electronic digits, went so high at Silicon Valley that they had to begin selling their Treasury investments. And because the Treasuries were tied to such a low interest rate, they were not going to be sold at face value.
Yeah, see, it's the inverse relationship between bond prices and yields. As interest rates rise, your existing bonds drop in price because you're able to replace those bonds at par value, paying a higher interest rate. They are not as valuable as a current issue bond. That's why they drop in prices. In this case, a lot of the treasury bonds, the safest investment in the world, theoretically, these are trading at 77 cents on the dollar. That's a 23% write down. And when you're talking about margins as slim as 5% capital, you can understand why there was concerns.
Last thing, according to this article, the employees of Silicon Valley Bank received their bonuses hours before government takeover. Isn't that interesting?
Now, what's interesting to me, way I'm understanding some of the things I'm looking at, is one of the many factors that's involved, and perhaps a very big factor is the fact, as you mentioned earlier, rates are going up. So the rates are paying depositors on deposits is higher, but their investments, they have multi-year, fixed rate products. So they're still getting paid the lower rate on these fixed rate products that they need to hold until maturity. And so what you are putting into deposits now is higher than your investments. Am I kind of skating on proper ground here, gentlemen?
You're kind of close. The thing is they couldn't hold those treasuries to maturity because they had such a demand for money going out, and they didn't have the available, so they had to start selling their assets.
Well, now there's penalty for that, right?
No, there's not necessarily a penalty, but it's the point is that they're not going to get face value.
Yeah, you're booking a loss. You're as opposed to if you hold to maturity, the loss doesn't happen. If you're forced to sell, you book the loss. You take the 23% haircut.
And in this case, there will be a loss because let's say you had acquired treasuries and they were yielding 6%. And the market, everything went crazy, and now treasuries are being issued at 2%. Well, you'd sell that at a surplus because it's going to produce more than what you could get out of a treasury you would buy today. Well, in this case, it was the reverse. So they had to sell their treasury positions because they needed the inflow of capital. And by doing that, they were going to take a loss because they could not get the face value of their treasuries.
Real quick, Doug, the other thing to understand about the impairment is what's going on in the venture capital world. The VC firms, who are the vast majority of Silicon Valley Bank's deposits, and it's important to note that 97.3% of the deposit at Silicon Valley Bank are not insured by the FDIC. These are venture capital dollars, and I'll get into that in more detail. But this is not something where the FDIC is really in trouble. They're going to have no problem helping out the retail investors, depositors, I should say. Yeah, go ahead, Doug, with your question. I'll come back to my other point later.
Well, my other question, I have two things. A question and then a comment. Question, which I'd like you gentlemen also. And once again, I part of the reason why I'm more in question mode is because, as I explained to the audience earlier, and for those of you who may have just shown up so that you understand, I'm a layman on this. I know more than the average bear in this stuff. I've learned. The average bear is not even sure, which bathroom to use. But so I know more than the average bear. But compared to these gentlemen, definitely not my cup of tea. So I've kind of decided to take more of a layman's. I've got questions because I do. And so the last question would be this: when the savings and loan thing happened, from what I'm understanding, it was basically bad investments and a combination of a rise of rates and a few other things. It was investments in things that basically were worthless paper, to put it in the most mildest layman terms as I can.
It was money laundering. It was money laundering fraud.
Okay.
And,
is there anything that is similar at all between the two situations?
Not as much as you might think. besides the fact that you're talking about impaired balance sheets. The S&L crisis was two parts. There were some domestic honest operators who just got caught up in business where the deregulation allowed them to take risks that they never should have been able to. And when the market turned south, the inevitable results happened. But the other part of the S&L crisis is that it was a money laundering system set up by that was being utilized by cartels, politicians, intelligence agencies, etc., to basically launder narcotics and human trafficking money for a several decade period. I did a video on that entire subject, but so I won't go into too much detail here.
Yeah, now they're telling us the larger institutions are safe. This is just pretty much among the smaller institutions. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, well, so I made a few phone calls over the weekend, and I've got a childhood friend who is a really good banking sector analyst for a asset management firm, and he helped me get everything right in 2008 and 9, understanding the exact level of the insolvency of the banks. And the takeaway I had with him is the major banks in the United States have some of the most pristine balance sheets they've seen in his entire career. The host who preceded us, Patrick, although his scenario of this whole financial system crumbling down is a scenario that is in play, it is not in play right this moment. Your Citibanks, your major institutions are not remotely in trouble at this point. The Silicon Valley Bank and the other important one, which is Silvergate Bank. The Silicon Valley Bank was a one-off. They did not need to be taken over by the FDIC. The problem they did is they had twofold. A lot of the venture capital firms had been pulling capital out because the VC business it's in a downturn. The liquidity has dried up. But at the same time, last Thursday and Friday, they did a horrible job of communicating with their customers and the public, and that triggered the run on the banks. This was a self-goal, or own goal, I think is the term. There's no reason this bank had to needed to have a run on it, and I've got some data behind that when Alan wants me to get into it.
Okay. Well, the other bank that I'm familiar with is Signature Bank in New York. They just got shut down by state authorities. But all right, last thing, and this is just a comment. One of the things that I've learned in what I do, and I'm gonna assume that the same is true here, is what we see and what we think we see and all that isn't always the full story. And there's usually either bigger or smaller things depending on what it is. And the only way I can illustrate it is I had a family member, in-law family member, visiting one time. And she got very upset because she overheard me saying that I like to give my dogs tacos every day. And she was very upset that I would do such a thing. And then I gave her context. Little doggy treat tacos. And my point is this. Be careful what you jump after, because there's always more to the story than what you see. Or as the old saying goes, there's always what he said, what she said, and then what really happened. All right, my time is done. Thank you, gentlemen, for entertaining my questions.
No, they're good questions. Thank you, Doug. Got a situation, and then we'll continue on, Brady. One person out there said that an ideal situation would be, Doug, pay attention, this is for you. The ideal situation would be for a private acquisition of Silicon Valley Bank with guarantees from Washington. Now, help me out. What article, section, clause gives the federal government the power to do that? Constitutionally?
Yeah, and I apologize. It looked like I wasn't paying attention. I was giving my dogs tacos.
Is it right next to the word democracy in the Constitution?
Yeah, that's where it's at. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no authority. And wait a second. If the problem is arising partly because of the federal government's fist being in the cookie jar, how is it letting them put both fists in the cookie jar makes it better?
Well, federal government is sure to get whatever cookie you can get, and we don't get any. So there.
Pretty much, yeah.
Another commentator on Meet the Press said that this is not going to be a really big problem because Silicon Valley Bank is a $200 billion bank in a $23 trillion industry. So if you do the percent on that, that's 0.87%. So right now it's a small tater in a big bowl of mash, but it's and to me this is not like the
Yeah, you sound a lot like my Arkansas family there on that one.
good.
Sorry.
Well, Alan,
Alan,
what you're trying to describe is there any risk of contagion? And in this case, there is not, because there was no counterparty risk. Yeah,
Right.
the people being damaged are the depositors, and I will address that as soon as you turn the ball over to me.
Okay. The thing is that what happened 2000, did you guys ever read the book or see the movie The Big Short?
Absolutely.
Okay.
yes.
I lived it.
We're talking about swaps, right, Brady?
Mm-hmm. And that's the second part of my major point. So go ahead and tee me up, please.
Okay. And the idea was that, how to explain this? Sorry, that they were going to put these swaps out there, and it was meant to be insurance. For example, Doug is the head of a really, really big national corporation, and it's got 100 million. It's got to do something with. So he decides to go invest in some investment. But when you put 100 million on the line, it's got to be good. Just like if you went out and spent 100 million on facilities, you'd insure it. So they would go out and get swaps. And the idea is default swaps. And the idea was that if the investment went bad, the insurance company, the one issuing the default swaps, would pay you because you've been paying insurance on these swaps. Well, no one thought that these mortgage-backed securities and other garbage would go bad. So they never asked, do you actually have an investment in what we're insuring against? They just issued the insurance because they're thinking, oh, they're going to be making money hand over fist, issuing insurance policies, credit default swaps that are never going to be called in on. Well, they got called in, and the companies that had issued all this insurance,
AIG
could not cover the call on the swaps. This is what, and this is supposedly in a really well regulated market, that no one checked that the issuer, like AIG, was issuing credit default swaps to anyone who would make a payment, because they thought, we're never going to have to pay on these, we're going to make a ton. Well, that's like, the one thing, one of the key things in insurance, any kind of insurance, is you don't get insurance unless you have an insurable interest.
Bingo.
Which is like saying, okay, all three of us know somebody who lives in an area, and this area is really prone, too bad, to wildfires, which means the house is going to burn down. So we all three of us go and get fire insurance on this guy's house, knowing eventually it's going to burn down. Well, we can't get fire insurance because we don't have an insurable interest. And they sold credit default swaps far in excess of what the market was. So when it went bad, AIG and the others couldn't cover, and the tumbling begins. That was the Big Short.
Yeah, you described that really well, and as I expected. The concept of reinsurance or the credit default swap is structurally identical to a reinsurance contract. It was basically and what they call side letters, which was basically perfected or invented by Warren Buffett's company, General Re, in the late 90s. What they would do is an insurance company has to, basically show they have enough assets to cover their liabilities. And General Re had General Re of Texas, General Re of Arkansas, General Re of Colorado. And what they would do is basically play the shell game and shift away the liabilities to meet their regulators every couple of years. At the end of the day, they didn't have the assets to cover the possible liability because they assumed nothing would ever go wrong, which is always a bad assumption. So, Alan, you described it really well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Anyway, the upshot is that we're not dealing with credit default swaps in this situation, but we are dealing with apparently a similar attitude, which is I don't have enough assets to cover my liabilities. And whatever, one of it is the deposits were going down because apparently that kind of industry was not doing well or was hard to get financing. And as Brady pointed out, you had an asset that could be replaced with a better one. A better asset to a treasury yielding 2% is a treasury yielding 6%. And they were not able, or they did not prepare for this problem. You're holding $200 billion in assets, and you're not spending a little time thinking, how safe are you? And these are the top people? What would you like to add, Brady?
Quite a bit. And I'm going to do this.
Go get them.
All right, chat. People in the chat understand this is my wheelhouse. This will be the best 5 or 10
the
minutes.
People in the chat, by the way, are hilarious. If you don't mind, I just want to say one thing. Ricky Roush, boomers get the died penniless in nursing home. Gen Z will get the carousel. Lucky bastards. Carousel, folks. Logan Run. Good stuff. I love the chat room. I don't know what's more entertaining. Watching the chat room or listening to you gentlemen really make me look like a very small individual in this topic. You guys are unbelievably awesome. So thank you for tackling this.
Doug or Brady, anything in the chat that we could talk about?
Well, Brady's got the con.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been concentrating on Alan as more than the chat. Now, so anyways, chat, this is my wheelhouse. I have lived in this world. These are the people I talk to on a pretty much daily basis. The host who's on before us, Patrick, is not incorrect that there is a severe risk of the whole financial system melting down. What I'm here to tell you is it's not imminent right this moment. Silicon Valley Bank and some of the other recent failures are more one-offs. The major banking system, the U.S. banking system, their balance sheets are very pristine right now. If you believe that the scheme that they've set up to do banking is remotely solvent, I'm not going to say that can't collapse, and I'm kind of expecting it to happen while I'm alive. It's just not going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of hype around Silicon Valley Bank. The discussion has been, that all of the venture capital world is going to go bankrupt. We're not going to have any more startups. All of California is going to be out of jobs. None of this stuff is accurate. I have in front of me something I've been given permission to share a little bit. This is an analyst for a company who had billions of dollars with Silicon Valley Bank. And I'm going to read a few paragraphs and explain how this liquidation is going to happen. And again, I said earlier, they did not need to go insolvent. They screwed it up with their bad messaging. One positive aspect of the SVB balance sheet. Now, let me start one sentence above. As mentioned, we think the deposits on balance sheet are very likely to see 100% recovery. One positive aspect of the SVB balance sheet is that such a high percent of their assets were invested in government-backed securities, which should make for a faster liquidation and therefore ability to recover a large percent of the deposits. These are far easier to value and liquidate than individual loans. To summarize, there are about $165 billion in deposits on the balance sheet. We think the combination of cash, securities, and loan sales to generate cash will produce 180 billion of cash. This should provide enough coverage for the deposits. A significant percent of this, 67%, should be able to be recovered fairly quickly within the next week, such that the FDIC should be able to deliver a large percent of existing deposits in the next week, and the remaining will come as they sell the loan portfolio. In other words, this bank barely had to go bankrupt. This is not the same thing as the 2008 and 9, where the balance sheets were just doomed beyond all recovery because they had mortgage-backed securities that would never recover. And I think that's counter to the narrative you're hearing in every single financial, all the reporting that's out there the last 2 days, last 48 hours, has gotten this wrong. They're saying this is a doom and gloom, and it is not. It is a one-off situation by a bank that was too stupid to hedge their own interest rate risk. And whoever that person who made that decision was, probably their CFO, that's a guy whose name we're going to know a lot about in the upcoming weeks. But nobody is going to lose their shorts besides Silicon Valley Bank's shareholders. Comments before I go to the next?
Yeah, it will be the shareholders that pay the price, not the depositors. One person noted that last week, apparently 42, I don't know what happened. I haven't heard. I don't know what happened, what was said, what pulled the trigger. But according to this one person who's on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, a run on the bank last week, $42 billion withdrawn on Thursday alone. That is that's some huge, heavy movement.
And that's simply because Silicon Valley Bank did terrible messaging. They could have explained that their portfolio, all they had to do is reclassify their assets from hold to maturity to liquidation, and there would not have been that run on the bank. Again, this is in a background that they already had withdrawals going on for the last year or so as the venture capital world has been pulling back. I mean, that was going on. It was already a tough environment, but their messaging is what caused more people to make a run on the banks. It's very important. They weren't transparent, and they were incompetent, which is unforgivable. But this was a preventable crisis, and the damage is going to be limited. There's not going to be contagion.
Well, that would be good news.
Yeah. Well, that said, I think it's a really important point that, and this I'll reference it back to what our previous host Patrick was talking about. There is the risk of contagion of the entire financial system. When I say that Silicon Valley Bank should have had their interest rate risk hedged, what I'm saying is they should have entered into interest rate swaps. Now, I'm going to share my screen real quick, and just to give you guys an idea of how big that market is and how every other financial institution in the world actually does what the Silicon Valley Bank should have done. What you do is basically offset your risk, and basically I will say to Alan, I go, Alan, I've got this, I got $1 billion worth of treasury bonds. I'm worried that if interest rates go from 2 to 3%, that there's going to be a haircut on my bond prices. So I'd like to buy an insurance contract from you, where I basically pay you a premium and you pay me some of, if that adverse situation occurs, you pay me to make my balance sheet solvent. That's how you insure interest rate risk. It's an interest rate swap. It happens daily, nightly, all over the world.
May I say something?
Please.
Well, in this case, you come to me, Alan, the insurance guy, and I happen to take a look at your books and records, and I know that you have this stuff on your books, right? So I'm providing insurance on something that actually exists with you, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Which is not what happened with credit default swaps.
Well, and
so
this is actually identical to that, and that's why I bring it. You're asking the right questions. So finish your thought, and I'll address it.
Well, it's that the problem is that when you have an insurance company that insures something that exists, we're fine. when you have an insurance company like AIG that is insuring something to such a level that is beyond what exists, then it's easy for the claims to come in and exceed whatever they have the capability of paying, because they didn't plan for this to just like the people at SVB didn't plan for their interest hedge. AIG and the others didn't plan that this whole market would blow when they're thinking, this is great. This is, it's getting AAA rated or whatever else. And so we'll insure it because no one will ever make a claim.
Yeah. So what they're saying, what you're saying as a financial institution is, you can't measure my gross risk because it's offset by net. I've got this insured. I've got a derivative that offsets that risk. And every single night, all these bankers go home knowing that their net risk is offset because the other financial institutions who are solvent, I can say Alan has $1 billion of my risk offset, and Alan's good for that $1 billion, and Alan's got his risk offset by Doug with another interest rate product and Doug's solvent. But if Doug becomes insolvent and he's the one insuring Alan's risk, Alan becomes insolvent, and now my risk is no longer secured. And now people are going to make a run on my bank. That's that's where it becomes, it's like a virus. It's the trickle down effect. So interest rate swaps, and that was the screen share I'm going to do again, is how these banks manage or manage this risk. And if you look up here at the top, this number here, 502.586, that's $502 trillion of outstanding interest rate swaps. Those are the recorded ones. The number is actually about 60 to 70% higher. So we're looking at about $900 trillion worth of interest rate risk is out there in the financial system today. By comparison, the amount of capital that was at risk during the great financial crisis in 2008 and 9 was about 23 trillion. So about 1/20th the size of risk. Now, interest rates are rising, banks are failing. If you start getting counterparty risk, like I just described, is the domino effect possible? And the answer is it absolutely is, to a magnitude never before seen in human history. This is the elephant in the room, are the interest rate swaps. If the Federal Reserve ever loses control, like per se the bond vigilantes were to be reinvented and drive interest rates outside of the control of the Fed, you are going to see financial institutions fail at a magnitude that we have never seen before, and that's your great reset. What matters is which means we rebuild the whole thing from scratch, because this is all a bunch of ones and zeros anyways. But that is the greatest risk in the financial system, bar none. I've been monitoring this for, God knows, 15 years now. It has always been the biggest risk. And for a major institution like Silicon Valley Bank to not have their interest rate risk hedged it's irresponsible. But the fact that they did not means there's no counterparty risk. There is no contagion risk. They weren't playing in this market. Now, this is something to keep an eye on for other financial institutions, because we are going to see some fail, especially coming out of Europe. And there is a difference between European banking regulations and American. We generally speaking, have about a 10% loan to value. I'm sorry, I forget what the exact term is. A bank can lend out about 90%. In America, can lend out about 90% of their assets. In Europe, that reserve level isn't 10%; it's 3%. So they're 3 times more leveraged in Europe, with a much weaker economy and central banks that don't have the same flexibility as ours. That's where the contagion is going to come from, and there is a real risk, but it's not today. It's not tomorrow.
Thank you, Brady. I'll clear one thing that you said. You said that they can lend out. The U.S. banks can lend out what % of their balance sheet?
90%. There's a 10% reserve ratio here in America.
Right.
That's by statute.
Well, just to be clear, the banks don't lend out their balance sheet. They create money by funding loans, and it's the amount, allegedly, it is the amount of loans they can create and fund in comparison to whatever their balance sheet is, but they're not really lending out their balance sheet. That's just the dollar amount that's supposed to set the limit.
Yeah, the accounting gets a little bit creative, and I think that's probably something we can't do on this show, but you're correct.
Last thing, and then we're going to move on to something fun. I think we've pretty much hammered this one. You're all familiar with Warren Buffett, and Brady mentioned him earlier, so I bring this up. This is what Warren Buffett said about derivatives. He said it, if there's a possible market deterioration, if there's a sudden unwinding of derivative positions, then he refers to derivatives as financial weapons of mass destruction. And that's definitely what we saw in 2008.
And yet he helped facilitate the creation of those weapons of mass destruction with General Re.
Well, that's probably why he knew it so well.
No, he definitely knew what he was talking about.
Yeah. All right. I think we've had enough whack news, and I think
one more.
Oh,
It
one more.
won't take long. Yeah.
Okay.
I asked you earlier about this. I told you I had one.
Well, you know, I forget things.
Yeah. No, don't worry, Esther. I've got you covered. So code compliance official finds alligator in North Carolina attic. A county code compliance official in North Carolina made a surprising discovery in the attic of a home under construction, an 8-foot alligator. The new Hanover County government said Dean Brown, a county code compliance official, was inspecting a new home under construction in the Carolina Beach Road area when he encountered a large reptile in the attic. The workers having lunch sitting in the next room had to leave. Yeah. What a surprise. They kind of laughed at me when I told them why. And I said, well, you might want to look because there's an alligator in the attic. It was the person who made the discovery said it was a first for him. Quote, you'll see nothing major. I have seen squirrels, of course, small rodents. Squirrels, probably the biggest ones I've seen in the attic. I have seen a gator that was in the yard, kind of sunbathing back in the 90s. You know, I really didn't think much of that. I have run into several snakes, but never an alligator in the attic. So I just thought that would be kind of a nice wacky doodle there to finish the wacky doodle news off with.
We didn't find out how the alligator got into the attic.
Yeah, apparently it's really good at navigating stairs.
Amazing.
I somehow somewhere in one of my feeds saw a video in the last week of somebody who had an alligator in their front yard and smacked him over the head with a frying pan, and it actually worked. Not sure where that video came from, but okay.
Oh, that's funny.
Wait a minute. Where did the alligator get the frying pan?
Oh, no, it's the other way around.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The human had the frying pan. The alligator was the smacky.
Oh, geez. Just a cute little alligator. Come on.
Tell you what, when that alligator charged this person, the fact that they didn't back down one bit, I go, okay, that's got to be Florida man for you. I was impressed because I would have backpedaled.
Yeah, the only gators I've ever seen have been behind enclosures at zoos,
which is where they belong.
Yeah.
Last thing, what Patrick, because you mentioned it, Brady, Patrick had said some stuff before he left and said goodbye to Doug. That was very nice. This idea that, okay, we're just going to let this all go to HE double hockey sticks, burn down, then we'll rebuild. That's not an answer for me. That's not a solution. The loss, the absolute suffering. How about let's learn about this system so we understand how it really can operate and we don't have these problems. And yeah, I'm self-promoting FedEd. Go to FedEd, FEDED.us. Check out FedEd, read it, understand it. Now we'll get back to this serious stuff. And we've already touched on one thing about, having the federal government do what somebody thinks would be a great idea. All right, Anti-Federalist number 9. I think Brady really likes this one. And this came out on or about October 17th, 1787. The kind of the subtitle is "A Consolidated Government is a Tyranny." So what I'm going to do is what we did last time is I'll read the paragraph, because I think it's really important on 9 and 10 that we hear what these people said, how they said it. And then Doug and Brady will have at it. How's that? That good? All right. I didn't get a finger, so good. All right, we continue. Okay. Oh, that's 3 fingers. That's super.
Yeah, you get 3. When you get 3 fingers, that's the one saying read between the lines.
Well, yeah, but remember what Jefferson said, there's nothing between the lines. So nanner nanner.
This is true. This is true. Yeah, you're quick. I'm impressed.
Okay.
Yeah, but the difference is, Doug, Jefferson said, I've read between the lines, I see blank spaces, and I don't see blank spaces between your fingers. So
well, let's see, mine is the shortened version. There's nothing between the lines, which is another way of saying nothing of value or importance or concern.
For the audience, because your window was queued up when it happened, all I did was this. And I just read between.
Yeah,
Alan, if you really want me to give you the finger, I'm more than happy to do so, but I try to be polite. It is your show after all.
You do a pretty good job. Thank you. Here we go.
Now, see, I've known him longer, so my respect for him has,
diminished. Yes. Okay,
here
we
go. I will say this real quick. I've known Alan a long time, but what's funny is our meeting each other was completely coincidental. We just so happened to be being in a meeting to be voted on whether or not we would be education fellows for American Freedom Alliance, and we were the 2 candidates. And we've been friends ever since. And yes, we both got voted in, by the way. It wasn't one got it and the other one didn't. We both got it. Was there a third one? That's 3. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, but I didn't become friends with them. I came friends with you. You're the only one I remember.
There we go. All right. So we go. We, the aristocratic party of the United States, lamenting the many inconveniences to which the late Confederation subjected the well-born, the better kind of people, bringing them down to the level of the rabble, and holding in utter detestation that frontispiece of every Bill of Rights, quote, that all men are born equal, beg leave for the purpose of drawing a line between such as we think were ordained to govern and such as were made to bear the weight of the government without having any share in its administration, to submit to our friends in the first class for their inspection the following defense of our monarchy. Thank you. Exactly. Aristocratical democracy. We got the D word. I can't believe it. The guy wrote with the D word. Any thoughts on this opening part?
Can I go first on this one?
Please.
Well, Montezuma is a wonderful name, regarded as a Pennsylvanian. The sarcasm dripping out of that opening paragraph tells you exactly where he's going to go. He's putting himself in a position of that he is writing the Constitution and telling us that we, the privileged class, are about to explain to you, the unwashed masses, how we are going to rule over you. That is setting the nature or setting the tone for this entire paper, I think.
Thank you, Brady.
Yeah, and basically saying that despite the fact they keep calling it a republic, it's not a republic. It's a monarchy, and it's an aristocracy in a democratic form. In other words, it looks like a democracy, and it even may walk a little bit like a democracy, but it's actually an aristocracy and a monarchy. This is once again, and I just want to kind of capitalize on what Brady said. The sarcasm is wonderful.
Thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons to read these, so we can understand that they really went after this.
Well, and they felt that this was a consolidation of power beyond what the Constitution was calling for. They were treating the enumeration doctrine as if it didn't exist, that all power was being given, or at least almost all the power was being given to the central government. That was the attitude Whether or not it's true is not the point. This is how they felt. And this is a true fear that the people had, because they knew that a consolidation of power in a central government was a dangerous thing, but they also knew pure democracy was a bad thing. And so what he's saying here is, oh, well, they're throwing what they try to make it look like a democracy, which is a bad thing. And on top of it, it's consolidated power, which is a monarchy and an aristocracy, which is a bad thing. The good thing they claim is there isn't there.
It's a good thing in the family home. It's just not a good thing in government. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
As a majority of all societies consist of men who, though totally incapable of thinking or acting in governmental matters, are more readily led than driven, wow, we have thought meet to indulge them in something like a democracy in the new Constitution, which part we have designated by the popular name of the House of Representatives. But to guard against every possible danger from this lower house, we have subjected every bill they bring forward to the double negative of our upper house and president. Nor have we allowed the populace the right to elect their representatives annually, lest this body should be too much under the influence and control of their constituents, and thereby prove the weatherboard of our grand edifice to show the shiftings of every fashionable gale. For we have not yet to learn that little else is wanting to aristocraticize the most democratical representatives than to make him somewhat independent of his political creators. We have taken away the rotation of appointment which has so long perplexed us. The grand engine of popular influence, which has so long perplexed us, the grand engine of popular influence. Every man is eligible into our government from time to time for life. This will have a twofold good effect. First, it will prevent the representatives from mixing with the lower class and imbibing their foolish sentiments with which they would have come changed on re-election. Charged on re-election. Doug, any thoughts?
Well, there was a belief that if ever there is a democratic system, that one of the ways to control the dangers of it is to have quick elections. One of the things under the Articles of Confederation was that the presidents of the Continental Congress only served one-year terms. This was to make sure that they didn't become kings, some people who held power for a long time. And this is kind of the thought here, is we need to make sure that nobody has too long in office, because then they become basically nobility. The other thing that's interesting when you read this is basically what it is saying is that when you have a class of people that rule and they're given too much time, they're given too much power, and it's funny because it almost dances on he's calling for democracy, but at the same time, be careful not to say that per se. But basically what this writer is saying, Montezuma, and I agree, Brady, that is a very clever name to choose, is that they understood that what's being said here is we understand what human nature is. You may claim that what you're doing is creating a representative system that's going to be fair and everything, but really what you're doing is you're creating a system full of people who say they're going to govern, and they plan to govern, but what they really are going to be is they're going to be a ruling elite, just like we saw across the ocean. That if you give people too much power, if you go cross that line just a bit, it goes from citizen and representation to subject and master or noble. And that there's a fine line there, and they believed that fine line was being crossed here.
Thank you so much, Doug. Brady, your thoughts?
Well, I had a tough time reading the paragraph, deciding whether whether Montezuma was arguing for or against democracy, when he talked about being more readily led than driven, and then complaining that the House of Representatives, being the voice of the people, had two checks against it. Was he saying there was not enough democracy or there was too much? I had a tough time with that paragraph for it, but I think Doug actually answered my questions, and I'm done there.
Super. All right. Next paragraph. And this one I'll break in half. They will, from the perpetuality of office, be under our eye, and in a short time will think and act like us, independently of popular whims and prejudices. For the assertion that evil communications corrupt good manners is not more true than its reverse. We have allowed this House the power to impeach, but we have tenaciously reserved the right to try. We hope, gentlemen, you will see the policy of this clause for what matters it who accuses. If the accused is tried by his friends, let me say that again. We hope, gentlemen, you will see the policy of this clause. What matters I think there's another word, Marty. Sorry about that. No. What matters it who accuses if the accused is tried? What matters if the accused is tried by his friends? In fine, this plebeian House will have little power, and that little be rightly shaped by our House of Gentlemen, who will have a very extensive influence from their being chosen out of the genteeler class. This, I'll make my comment. He doesn't seem to be too happy with the House of Representatives, and that he refers to the Senate as the House of Gentlemen, given that these are to come from the states. To me, I take this, he's just knocking the whole thing. And that, ultimately this plebeian House, meaning the House of Representatives, will have little power. Doug, your thoughts?
Well, he's complaining about the democracy in the House. He's complaining about the Republican form of government in the Senate. He's complaining about the fact that the governmental bodies, the state legislatures in the Senate and the federal government through the president, is 2 against 1 when it comes to the democracy in the House, but yet the democracy is bad. And to be honest with you, with this paragraph, I'm literally thinking in my mind, is there no pleasing you? Because what else is there? We're running out of options here. You're complaining about anything and everything thrown out there, and we know it doesn't work. This is granted, this is something that has been tried in exactly this fashion, but things that have been tried similarly to this fashion have done well. But apparently there's too much democracy in one, there's not enough democracy in the other. Where's the line? What do you want us to do with this? And so, to be honest with you, it's almost like, and this is something I can say on this show, not KMET, almost sounds like he's being a habitual bitcher. He's, it's like, come on, where can we? Now, that said, I understand the root of the argument. The root of the argument is this. And this is why he's making it sound like it's an impossible solution. He doesn't want a federal government. He wants it to be the states only. He wants a loose Articles Confederation, that the states be as independent as possible, that there should be no centralized government whatsoever other than a, gentleman's agreement between the states. That's why he's making it impossible. That's why he's saying, hey, I'm not happy with the House. I'm not happy with the Senate. There's nowhere else to go other than to not have the system and go back to the Articles. And that's his point.
Thank you, Doug. Brady?
I get the impression that Montezuma is one of the unwashed masses and is alarmed that despite the appearance of protections against aristocracy, he sees a protected class having the powers to, the sole power to represent, to oversee themselves, and the unwashed masses are sort of being disempowered. And that's my take from what he's saying here, and what he said above and below. He appears to be someone from the middle or lower classes, and that's the standpoint he's arguing from. And he's saying, look, you're going to set up these lords and gentry like we left Europe for, to get away from. That's his concern. That's kind of what he's saying.
I get that he's, and it's going to be interesting to see as we go through this. Doug pointed out he's just complaining. He doesn't like anything. He doesn't like ketchup. He doesn't like mustard. So we're going to find out, but before we get to the end, is there anything that does please him? Is there anything, does he suggest, I don't like all of that you put down. This is what I would do. So we're going to find out. I continue. It is true, every third senatorial seat is to be vacated duennially, but 2/3 of this influential body will remain in office and be ready to direct, or if necessary, bring over to the good old way the young members, if the old ones should not be returned. And whereas many of our brethren, from a laudable desire to support their rank in life above the commonalty, have not only deranged their finances, but subjected their persons to indecent treatment as being arrested for debt, we have framed a privilege clause by which they may laugh at the fools who trusted them. But we have given out that this clause was provided only that the members might be able without interruption to deliberate on the important businesses of their country. I'm thinking about the clause where members cannot be stopped or arrested going to or going from Congress. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah, you're talking. I'm not following you on Anti-Federalist number 9. I couldn't find where you started because it looked like you started someplace other than. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, where the heck is he reading? But now I found it. Okay, I see where.
Okay.
Yeah. That's in Article 1. And basically, the idea was, and this is yeah, I'm not seeing it right now. It's Article 1, Section 4, 5, or 6. I can't remember which one. Oh, it's in Section 6. There we go. And the idea, well, let me tell you what I tell my classes. The problem was that under the British system and what was happening in the colonies and all of this is if you wanted a vote to happen, what was happening is people would get arrested so they couldn't vote. The opposition party would have, find a way to keep them from even getting in the chambers. And so the reason why they said, well, you can't be arrested going to or from or while in chambers is to keep that from happening. But then the Anti-Federalist Paper writer here, Montezuma, astutely recognizes the problem with that, which is what we have today. A quote unquote ruling class that thinks it's above the law and can't be arrested for anything at any time. And so, but what fascinates me is whenever you get into these political dialogues, it becomes an argument of extremes. Well, if you don't allow this, then that's going to happen. If you don't allow that, then this is going to happen. And it's almost like reason goes out the window, and all the safeguards that go with it. So, but I understand the fear. I recognize the fear, but I believe they're overstating it.
Thank you, Doug. Brady.
There's a word in this section that really stands out, and that word is privilege. There's a reason the missing 13th Amendment reiterated the reason we don't allow people to have privileges. The way the word privilege was meant back in that day was that one class of society could not be held accountable, they were above the law, etc. That's exactly what Montezuma is talking about here. And I'll pass that right back to Doug because he does a really good description about privileges.
Well, it's just a fear of, a nobility. Is there going to be nobility? And that goes back to the Declaration of Independence. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, what do you mean by that? First of all, it meant that there's no nobility. There's no privileged class. And when it comes to that, then notice the words, all men are created equal. There's no privileged class because we're all created equal. We all have the equal number of rights. We all have equal, opportunity, so on and so forth. That's kind of what they're steering for. It's funny you bring up the missing 13th Amendment, because for those of you in the chat and who are listening without the chat, or even later on Rumble, whenever this gets on Rumble, what he's talking about is an amendment that was written and passed that basically said the same thing that Article 1, Section 9 in its final clause says, but rather than to office holders, also to everyone. And while I'm looking, let me see if I can look this up real quick, because I actually have the pages from a book in my phone, and so I'll pull that up in a minute and read from it. But there it is. Wow, that's the fastest I've ever found it. So here's what it says in Article 1, Section 9. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. So this is foreign intrusion we're worried about. These are people that are not only privileged, but they're connected to Europe. The whole point of the Constitution was to disconnect us. The reason why it says in Article 1, Section 8 that we will coin our money is if we are coining our own money, who's not? The banks in Europe. If we are not allowing our lawyers, for example, to be a part of a international bar, what are we doing? We're keeping Europe out of our laws, out of our banking. And part of the reason I bring up that is because when you get to the missing 13th Amendment, and the book that a friend of mine has that he won't sell me, he says it's priceless, so I got to find one for myself. Military Laws of the United States, and this is one of many books published in the 1800s that had the missing 13th Amendment in it. The 13th Amendment that went missing, that was literally pulled out of the Constitution, is not a conspiracy theory. There is all kinds of evidence proving its existence. This particular book, Military Laws of the United States, which is prefaced by the Constitution of the United States, compiled and published under the authority of the War Department, not the Department of Defense, it's the War Department. It was being called what it was really about, by Truman Cross, Washington, Edward de Craft, printer, 1825. Okay, now here's what the original article of Amendment number 13 said. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title or nobility or honor, or shall without the consent of Congress accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. What this is saying is we're going to take care of our own business. We are not going to allow foreign influence. We're not going to allow nobility here. We're not going to allow the nobility in other countries to influence our people. We're going to take care of our own business. We'll remain separate. We're not going to be a part of central banking in Europe. We're not going to be a part of the international bar or international legal system. We're going to take care of our own deals. Now, some people are like, gosh, it's protectionism and isolationism. That's horrible. No, that's putting America first. Oh, it sounds like a certain president. Not that I'm going to bring up any names. Trump. That's what it is. That's what the Constitution was all about, is making sure that those foreign influences weren't screwing us up. And that's the reason why there's not supposed to be a privileged class. Because if there's a privileged class, if all men are not created equal, and there is a class that does get privileges, they do have nobility, then tyranny runs amok.
Well, if we're gonna get through the rest of this paper, let's let Alan get back to work. But appreciate that. I appreciate that, Doug. I am so wanting to address a couple of the points, but that can all wait for later weeks.
Here we go. We have frequently endeavored to effect in our respective states the happy discrimination which pervades this system. But finding we cannot bring the states into it individually, we have determined and have taken pains to leave the legislature of each free and independent state, as they now call themselves, in such a situation that they will eventually be absorbed by our grand continental vortex, or dwindle into petty corporations, and have power over little else than yoking hogs to determine the width of cartwheels.
That is the most prophetic thing I think we've read in the Anti-Federalist Papers.
It's also a jab specifically at Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton argued that the states were the problem and that they should be nothing more than corporations, meaning political entities that took care of basically they're only the real local stuff, but for the most part, they were absorbed into a much larger body and controlled by that body.
Clerks.
And at
Clerks.
least that's
he wanted them to be clerks.
Provinces. We want to get rid of statehood and make it provinces because these states and I have a Hamiltonian used to come to my Capistrano class. I guess he decided he didn't want to argue with me anymore, and he says, well, that's what the founders wanted. They thought the state's sovereignty would be a problem. He didn't understand my defense of the 10th Amendment, and he said that the 10th Amendment was just put in there just to appease a few people. No, the whole point was we want to hang on to sovereignty. And that's the argument here. And the sarcasm here is dripping deeply. Once again, he's speaking from the point of view of, the writers of the Constitution, and we're going to, endeavor to take over your states and, absorb them, but we're going to make it look like they're still sovereign. And so he was right in the long run, but not right in what the Constitution actually says. Someone like Madison's response would simply be, but that's not authorized. And I think Montezuma then would probably have said, doesn't matter if it's authorized, this is what tyrannies do.
What's interesting is that, well, I'll just keep reading. Here we go. Sorry. But aware that an intention to annihilate state legislatures would be objected to by our favorite scheme, we have made their existence as a board of electors necessary to ours. This furnishes us and our advocates with a fine answer to any clamors that may be raised on this subject. We have so interwoven continental and state legislatures that they cannot exist separately, whereas we in truth only leave them the power of electing us. For what can a provincial legislature do when we possess the exclusive regulation of external and internal commerce, excise duties, imposts, post offices, and roads, and when we and we alone have the power to wage war, make peace, coin money, if we can get bullion, if not, borrow money, organize the militia, and call them forth to execute our decrees and crush insurrections assisted by a noble body of veterans subject to our nod, which we have the power of raising and keeping even in the time of peace.
Well, you talk about a reference to Shays' Rebellion.
No,
Brady?
That's exactly what popped into my head like 5 times while he was reading. Yeah.
Hey, we're don't worry. We're gonna. If this is a reference, by the way, to the Senate, we're gonna let your legislatures vote us in to make you feel important. But really, you're just nothing more than electors for our Senate. And then we're going to take all of these powers and we're going to crush you with it, just like we did in Shays' Rebellion, using corporate mercenaries. That's basically what he's saying.
That was the fear, and we may be living it, or an attempt at living. People trying to impose that upon us right this moment, and pretty much every day since. Well, this isn't YouTube, so I'll say it. J6.
Well, one of the references there too, I kind of got a kick out of, because I talk about this. Article 1, Section 8 says that it is up to the militia to execute the laws of the Union. This was a part of the design to keep policing agencies of the federal government from being created. But, and that's a good thing. But now Montezuma is saying, no, that's a bad thing, because now we can use us to enforce their tyrannical. They're not even going to have their own police. They're going to use us to enforce it against us. And so he took what is supposed to be a good thing to avoid a use of policing agencies into you're forcing us to turn against ourselves with your edicts and mandates and tyrannical laws and desires. So that is that. And once again, I'm one of the few people out there that talks about. I did, by the way, come across another person who's an old friend of mine from long ago who talks about this, but I'm one of the few people who talks about the fact that in Article 1, Section 8, it says that the militias are there to execute the laws of the Union. And it's interesting that's brought up here, that Montezuma, the writer of this Anti-Federalist paper, is considering that to be a bad thing. But like I said, that idea was designed to eliminate the threat, not that it did, because now look where we're at, of policing agencies being created by the federal government to use authoritarianly as basically a standing army against the people, as we see the FBI and ATF, and I mean the list of alphabet agencies goes on and on and on.
Did I mention to you, gentlemen, that had I been alive back in the day, this is the Anti-Federalist paper that I would have hoped that I would have personally written. This is my favorite Anti-Federalist paper because he was very concerned. Montezuma was very concerned about what the federal government was actually going to become, not what they said they were doing, but what it could be. Yeah. And he turned out to be right about a lot of things.
Well, like I said, Madison was the optimist. Hey, not authorized, and he was right. But human nature became unrestrained eventually by those limitations.
Well, I still haven't found the bright spot to this one, but I'll keep reading. What have we to fear from state legislatures or even from states when we are armed with such powers, with a president at our head? A name we thought proper to adopt in conformity to the prejudices of a silly people who are so foolishly fond of a republican government that we are obliged to accommodate in names and form to them in order more effectively to secure the substance of our proposed plan. But we all know that Cromwell was a king with the title of protector. I repeat it. What have we to fear armed with such powers, with a president at our head who is captain, general of the army, navy, and militia of the United States, who can make and unmake treaties, appoint and commission ambassadors and other ministers, who can grant or refuse reprieves or pardons, who can make judges of the Supreme and the other continental courts? In short, who will be the source, the fountain of honor, profit, and power, whose influences, like the rays of the sun, will diffuse itself far and wide, will exhale all democratical vapors, and break the clouds of popular insurrection? But again, gentlemen, our judicial power is a strong work, a masked battery. Few people see the guns we can and will ere long play off from. For the judicial power embraces every question which can arise in law or equity. Under this Constitution and under the laws of the United States, which laws will be, the supreme laws of the land. Brady?
Well, once again, the sarcasm just drips off that page. What he's saying is basically that the limited powers, and that's air quotes limited, are not limited enough. He's saying we gave too much power to the central government, and it is far more than he's comfortable with.
Doug?
Well, when he goes through a list of those powers, conveniently leaves out the mechanisms of oversight by the states. Part of what makes this country a republic is that Constitution is filled with oversights by the states. If you read the Constitution, one of the things that you'll understand is there's nothing the federal government could do without direct or indirect approval from the state legislatures. And that was conveniently left out of this. And then when it is mentioned, it's like, oh, so you make it sound like we've got a little control here. I think that the mechanisms are very important, and that the mechanisms were and would have kept the federal government from becoming what it did. What happened, however, once again, tyranny, human nature, is those mechanisms one by one have been diminished and eventually removed throughout our history, so that now about the only mechanisms left is is kind of the Electoral College and the fact that the states ratify amendments, both of which are also now under scrutiny and danger right now. We need to go back to, this person is right that without those mechanisms, it is a government with too much power. And we have become that government for the most part without those mechanisms. And he left those mechanisms out on purpose because he wanted you to think that this government was out of control and there was no mechanism. However, they were there. The question was, how long would those mechanisms be followed? And to answer the question of someone out there saying, well, Doug, when did those mechanisms start being removed? Before the ink was dry. So while they were very good mechanisms, and he is wrong in his writing, as long as those mechanisms in place, he was right that those mechanisms would be gone.
Thank you for that. This power extends to all cases affecting ambassadors or other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizen of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming land under which grants of different states, and between a state or the citizen thereof and foreign states, citizens or subjects. He seems to be explaining more about what this will apply to.
Well, this is an attempt to use the words of the Constitution against itself. That's language directly taken from the Constitution. While it may be slightly out of context in the sense that, once again, there are mechanisms for oversight by the states that are supposed to be in place, the fear that the judicial branch would become nothing more than the judges who did whatever the king wanted, that's what he's basically saying. That's what the fear is here.
Brady, anything?
Just elaboration on what the top of the paragraph said. So go on. Let's
Okay.
In the interest of time, let's get
Here we
through
go.
this.
Now, can a question arise in the colonial courts which the ingenuity or sophistry of an able lawyer may not bring within one or the other of the above cases? Certainly not. Then our court will have original or appellate jurisdiction in all cases. And if so, how fallen are state judicators? And must not every provincial law yield to our supreme fiat or the Constitution? Yes. And finally, we shall entrench ourselves so as to laugh at the cobbles of the commonality. A few regiments will do at first. It must be spread abroad that they are absolutely necessary to defend the frontiers. Now a regiment and then a legion must be added quietly. By and by a frigate or two must be built, still taking care to intimate that they are essential to the support of our revenue laws and to prevent smuggling. We have said nothing about a Bill of Rights, for we viewed it as an eternal clog upon our design, as a lock chain to the wheels of government. Though, by the way, as we have not insisted on rotation in our offices, the simile of a wheel is ill. We have for some time considered the freedom of the press as a great evil. It spreads information and begets a licentiousness in the people, which needs the rein more than the spur. Besides, a daring printer may expose the plans of government and lessen the consequences of our president and senate. For these and many other reasons, we have said nothing with respect to the right of the people to speak and publish their sentiments, or about their palladiums of liberty and such stuff. We do not much like that sturdy privilege of the people, the right to demand the writ of habeas corpus. We have therefore reserved the power of refusing it in cases of rebellion, and you know we are the judges of what is a rebellion. Brady?
Oh, I was hoping you'd take him first. I was grinning from ear to ear. Listen, please, Brady.
Doug, you know me too well. We have said nothing about a Bill of Rights, for we have viewed it as an eternal clog upon our designs. This is a conversation that we're not going to get through tonight, and I'm just going to give the bare bones of it. But the Bill of Rights was not necessary. It was actually redundant, and in my opinion, it basically weakened the enumeration doctrine by stating that it was very crystal clear what the enumeration doctrine said. The federal government, which we're about to create, has these powers and only these powers. And by enumerating them a second time through the Bill of Rights, that created ambiguity, and that has led to an awful lot of the weakening of what the enumeration doctrine meant. The federal government had certain powers, and that was it, period. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. 9 and 10, I'm okay with. 1 through 8 were all redundant. That is a very long conversation. I know there's some people saying, what about my Second Amendment? It was not necessary. If the federal government did not have your ability to take away your right to bear arms, they did not have that right. It doesn't need to be said a second time. But that's it's a very long conversation. That's called incorporation. We don't have time to do it tonight.
Yeah, there's a lot to do with that. The other thing I thought that you would have fun with actually was when the press was brought up. Once again, there's no authority to the federal government given to interfere with the press. But the sarcasm here is, yeah, how dare we allow a press to not have a Bill of Rights to protect it because, well, we don't want there to be a Bill of Rights protected. This is his sarcasm because, they may accidentally stumble upon truth and publish it or something. And
Doug, that's the exact same argument, just a different amendment.
Yeah, exactly. But what my point is, one of the things that you have said is one of the greatest liberating things to happen in history when it came to liberty and all of that is the spread of information. The Gutenberg press, which really opened everything up. And this writer of this Anti-Federalist Paper, number 9, sees that, feels that way, says, hey, we need to make sure we preserve these things. The problem is they felt that the way to preserve it was a Bill of Rights, which muddied the waters. Once again, enumeration doctrine. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, judicatures is the word that you were looking for earlier. You said judicators. That's the difference between legislators and legislatures. This is a body of judicators, judicatures. And what basically is being said here is the state judicial system is so important. And by creating this federal judicial system, you are making the state judicial systems unnecessary. You are taking away our ability to adjudicate ourselves at our level. It's a threat against localism. And I will say this, if you read Madison's notes, one of the things that pops up for a moment is there's actually an argument made that maybe we don't need a judicial branch at the federal level. Let the states handle their own stuff. But then the argument was made, what about maritime law? What about disputes between the states? So on and so forth. So the judicial branch was created, but it was created reluctantly in the sense of not everybody, but many of the people there. What this person is arguing against is not what the convention came up with. It is what Hamilton wanted. And in a way, they're right, because what we have today, unfortunately, is Hamilton's America.
Agreed. And I'm not happy about it.
And finally, our friends, we find, have been assiduous in representing our federal calamities until at length the people at large, frightened by the gloomy picture on one side and allured by the prophecies of some of our fanciful and visionary adherents on the other, are ready to accept and confirm our proposed government without the delay or forms of examination, which was the more to be wished, as they are wholly unfit to investigate the principles or pronounce on the merit of so exquisite a system, impressed with a conviction that that this Constitution is calculated to restrain the influence and power of the lower class, all caps, to draw that discrimination we have so long sought after, to secure to our friends privileges and offices which were not to be obtained under the former government, because they were in common, to take the burden of legislation and attendance on the public business off the commonality, who will be much better able thereby to prosecute with effect their private business, to destroy that political 13-headed monster, the state of sovereignties, to check the, I don't know how to say that word, licentiousness of,
Licentiousness.
thank you, of the people by making it dangerous to speak or publish daring or tumultuary sentiments. This guy's got some big,
Tumultuary.
boy, these are big words for me. To enforce obedience to laws by a strong executive, aided by military pensioners, and finally to promote the public and private interests of the better kind of people. We submit it to your judgment to take such measures for its adoption as you, in your vision, may think it fit. Signed by unanimous order of the Lords Spiritual and Temporal, Montezuma. Last thoughts.
Well, the final paragraph makes it crystal clear that I believe that Montezuma was quite likely a member of Shays' Rebellion, which is fine because they had a legitimate grief. They weren't paid. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll pass the ball on this one.
Now, I think you are right. Now we have to understand, and this is something I've said earlier in this program. There's three sides to every story. What he said, what she said, what really happened. Is this writer, as an anti-federalist, essentially right? Yes. Are they using maybe a little bit of an exaggerated argument? Yeah, but it came true. But here's the interesting thing, and this goes back to what I said earlier. Complains this doesn't work. The solution is not presented, but the solution basically is Articles of Confederation. We need to go back to that. That's all we need to do. But actually, if this is, and I thought the same thing, Brady, if this is indeed one of the members of the veterans of Shays' Rebellion, there's a little bit added twist to the story that we have not considered. Because while Shays' Rebellion vets had all kinds of the right to feel the way they did, they didn't pay, they couldn't do anything with their monies. Well, it wasn't even really monies. They were notes that were worthless. It was worthless paper that they were given. That nobody would accept. It was, in a sense, they were IOUs, is what they were actually. But nonetheless, even though they had every right, there was a concern by General Knox, who was in constant contact with George Washington, during the time of Shays' Rebellion, that what was fueling it was something that wasn't quite what they were saying that was behind them. This idea that everybody fought this war, so the land should be equally distributed. Everybody did this and did that, so everything should be equally given. So while on the surface, Shays' Rebellion was exactly a good thing, it was the right thing, I don't blame them. What was deep down underneath the covers was what we would call today a socialist movement. Collectivist movement, thank you. A utopianist movement, whatever you want to call it, communitarianism.
Non-Republican form of government.
I'm sorry?
Non-Republican form of government. That's all I can throw in.
Too.
Yeah.
And
no, it's important to use the word utopia because Jefferson was crystal clear that utopia will never exist in a land of men. You know?
Well, so we've got this, and so really what's not said here, and I really believe Montezuma might have been one of the purveyors of this idea, was utopianism. Can't have democracy, that doesn't work. Can't have the republic, that doesn't work. We know monarchy is dangerous. What's left? Oh, what we were calling for during Shays' Rebellion, equal distribution of everything.
I would agree. I consider this, in my opinion, the most important of the Anti-Federalist Papers. And his criticisms were not wrong in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But the lack of solutions, which you pointed out, they're profound. It's important. It seems to me the solution, what he was basically saying, is that what we laid down in the Constitution would not be followed. But had we followed it, all of his complaints would have been addressed, or a vast majority of them. And the issue is that we did not follow the checks and balances.
And then we ask, why didn't we follow the checks and balances? Because men of power do not like obstacles, and they knew what the obstacles were, and they dismantled them. And the obstacles for their tyranny was the oversight by the state legislatures. And so what happened was exactly what the writers of the Anti-Federalist Papers predicted, not because they're right, because human nature was not guarded against enough.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that. We're getting to the end. I'll make a final comment, and then I want you all to promote yourself. And I'll tell you what I get out of this Montezuma, a very articulate complainer, doesn't offer any solutions, only sees the worst of any situation. And I think, as we've all talked about before, he doesn't really read the Constitution. He takes it bits and pieces, makes the worst of the worst, doesn't see the potential or promise. And what I get out of this, being the least educated in this area as you two, is that what was missing was the instruction manual when they got the thing done. Hey, people, this is yours. Take care of it. You have to keep track of what they're doing in DC or elsewhere. They won't keep track of it for you. That's what's been missing.
Well, there was one man that said pretty much what you're saying. A republic, madam, if you can
keep it. Benjamin Franklin. All right, we're getting to the end. Doug?
I am Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, DouglasVGibbs.com, PoliticalPistachio.com. 2 radio programs, both of them on AM and FM radio. I didn't say it wrong, despite the fact that Alan thinks I did.
Yeah, you did.
Because AM stands for
America.
All right. See, just cue him up, and he just kind of bounces and spins. But anyway, so Mr. Constitution Hour, Saturday nights at kprz.com. And that's at 9 p.m. Pacific, and then KMET Constitution Radio, 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific in the afternoon on Saturdays. And that's where it is a political program through the lens of the Constitution, with Alan Myers as a co-host and Dennis Jackson as a co-host. And every once in a while, Brady gets to call in and make some have some fun as well. I also am all over the web. I have YouTube videos. I have other videos. Tell you what, just go to DouglasVGibbs.com and you can find it all. DouglasVGibbs.com/radio or /video if you want to get a little bit more, or just go to PoliticalPistachio.com. Thank you for spending the time. Really enjoyed having you.
Brady.
My new channel is now up at Rumble. That's Brady Fox, FOXX. My old War Hamster channels are still active, and they will remain so for quite some time. My Substack will be active. I'll be announcing it next week, and I've got some good articles that I hope you all enjoy. But the last video, my newest video is up, is called The Shadow State Part 3, The Rise of the CIA. If you're interested in that topic, I've dropped some pretty interesting facts. And more to come very soon. Lots of content on its way.
And the audience is showing love. The dancing cockroaches are in play.
Brady, do me one favor. Just move left or right out of the scene for a minute so we can see the full artwork behind you, if you don't mind. There you go. All right.
The War Hamster.
Thank you. Thank you. Alan Myers here. FedEd, FEDED.us. Saturdays, 1 to 3 p.m. West Coast time. Constitution Radio on KMET 1490 AM. And I say AM because it stands for America. So check that out on the web. I see the Kath is in the house. So I'll wrap this up. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing time today, going through Anti-Federalist 9. And
yeah, I sent out an email saying we were going to get to 10. Boy, was I a fool.
No. And all the time we spent on Silicon Valley Bank and the craziness there, it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out over the next week or two. I'm sure we'll be coming back to it. I finish. Alan Myers
still demanding another view of the war hamster behind you there, Brady.
Okay.
So one more time, so everybody can see the war hamster.
Y'all just want me out of the picture.
No,
yeah. The image is more popular than you, sir.
There you go.
Awesome.
All right.
That is awesome.
That was donated by a friend from Patriots.win, which I consider to be the very best message board discussion site for understanding what's really going on in the world. Patriots.win. Shout out to my friends there.
Thank you so much. All right. Alan Myers here. This has been another episode of For the Republic. To all you good people out there, you lovers and defenders of liberty, freedom, rights, individuality, equality of opportunity to all. To all you patriots. Yeah, you know who you are. Until next time, may you be and stay safe and well. Patriot out. Thanks, gentlemen. We got through it. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I enjoy being a part of this show, and thank you for the love. For those of you who don't understand the dancing cockroaches, it's an inside thing for the folks that hang out with what I do, because I have my quote. We complain about the cockroaches in Washington. We breed them locally. Stop breeding them. So,
the Kath, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Goody. Where's your sidekick?
Well, Chris is a little under the weather, so it is me, myself, and I tonight. I think Tammy's going to jump on in a little while, but
okay.
They just have me for now.
And your puppies.
And the puppies. Oh Lord, are they showing? No. They're quiet.
What are you going to chat on tonight?
Oh, there's so much stuff happening. I just kind of pulled some tweets from here and there, and just talking about the craziness. They're predicting something major is happening tomorrow. That's what they're saying.
Well, I'll tell you, I have a
major happening every day.
I know.
I have a major prediction for tomorrow. You want to hear it?
Yeah, it's Monday.
Sun's coming up.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. We can't see it right now. It's kind of cloudy.
Now, that brings up one of my favorite